All right. Hello, everyone. If you're new here, my name's Tan. Thank you for joining us for our latest Kumi Now online gathering. I've provided a few links for you to know more about Sabil and Kumi Now, but I can send this again since there's more people joining. In any case, today we'll be joined today by Dr. Basilius Zeno to speak about Syria. So we have a very important session coming ahead. I'm very excited to welcome him into the session and present on this issue with us. So the first part will be dedicated to our guests, but please stay around after he leaves as we will be dedicating the rest of the hour to turning our knowledge into action. And before we start, I'd like to remind you that the session is being recorded and will be shared after the event. So please make sure your mic is off. And if you want to ask a question, you can put this in the chat and I'll make sure to relay it to our speaker once he finishes his presentation. And to introduce our speaker today before he begins, Basilius Zeno is an assistant professor in the Department of Political Studies at Trent University in Canada. His work combines research, advocacy, and policy work on forced migration and asylum, legal violence, social movement, and interpretive decolonizing methodologies. Basilius received his PhD in political science from the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 2021, and he also holds a BA and MA in classical and Islamic archaeology from Damascus University in Syria. He is the author of an academic book called The Empire's Mirror, The Coinage of Seleucid Kings of Syria in Arabic, and several articles and reports. So he is an expert in Syria. He's based in Canada, and we're really excited to welcome him. So Basilius, whenever you're ready, you can begin. And if you need to share your screen at any point, please let me know and I can give you permission.
Yeah, I need to share some slides, so that will help my audience actually to have a sense about the trajectories of the Syrian conflict.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, I think you should be able to share your screen.
Perfect. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. How much time I have? You can tell like I lost my voice. Yeah, due to like since the military campaign on like now 2 weeks ago. We have been. I'm Syrian as well, and I myself like I'm not a second generation diasporic community. I participated in the social movement myself, became displaced, and invested my expertise, reshaped my interest around the issues that shaped my life, which is basically living under Assad's rule and dynasty for all my life. First under Hafez al-Assad and then under Bashar al-Assad. So this is significant. So you can tell like I completely lost my voice due to communication with my families and friends who remain in Syria. So today I will start by giving you a glimpse of some of the reflections and concerns that I have, and then I will unpack the story, how we ended up with one of the bloodiest conflict in contemporary history of Syria and also worldwide, given the large number of displaced people and refugees, half of the population. This is a significant number. So when you measure numbers of displaced people, like if a country that has, let's say, 50 million or 100 million, say like 5 million or 6 million were displaced, maybe the number could be larger than Syria. But you have to measure that based on the population per capita. When you are saying like half of the population are internally or externally displaced, this is a significant number. To simplify it, every single Syrian family has a person who either displaced or was killed during the conflict. There isn't a single house from my household and onwards. So if you check the map of Syria, and so as I said, like I will start with a quick reflection. Maybe in the Q&A, you will be more interested in the in the current situation, which is still unfolding. So all what we have currently as scholars and also as citizens of that country is to actually to make sense, participate, have communications, but no one is having yet the big picture, and as the situation is still unfolding. But if you check the map just a few weeks ago, so look at the one to the left, December 3rd, 2024, and compare it to today, like December 16, 2024. So just you saw many of these maps over the past few years, especially after the rise of ISIS. Iraq had similar maps. So just to simplify it for you, like the red represented the Syrian government forces under Bashar al-Assad. The conflict was de facto frozen after the Asitana Accord, which was basically an agreement between the patrons of the conflict, Turkey, Iran, Russia, and the Gulf, actually, to stabilize the fault lines. This is how we ended up with at least like 5-6 years of frozen conflict, which is represented with the map to the left. Red, the yellow represent the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is mostly Kurdish troops, and they are backed by the Americans. The green to the northwest, which is Idlib, is a place where the HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, forces were based and actually became, and I hate to say that, but that's how the regime and its ally treated as the dumbster. So basically, anytime they are doing, have been doing like evacuation or basically forcing people to flee from their towns, they will send them to the northwest. That was many of the local agreements. So basically, give up under the protection of the Russians, and that basically give up your weapons, and then instead of being stay at your own home, they send people there, which has been severely impacted by the earthquake that hit the region a couple of years ago. To the right is just the current map of Syria, which is fundamentally different. The red has disappeared, and now they are under the table kind of negotiation taking place between the SDF and the HTS. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is the dominant one, the green one. The SDF is the yellow one. Because there are some challenges here. To the right is what Israel did 2 days ago, which is basically, and I'm happy to discuss every single aspect, but let me just reflect on the challenges. As Syrians are celebrating the demise of Assad in such a humiliating way, which doesn't leave any pockets of resistance, which is good. Which means, like, if the intervention, let's say in 2013, after the usage of the alleged use of chemical weapons against people in Ghouta, which is more likely the regime used it, but there was a possibility of military intervention. I'm not sure if you remember these days, but there was a compromise between the Russians around that time and the Americans, Obama administration, that Syria would give up its chemical weapons arsenals. And the regime would remain in power, so no military intervention. So now let's flip the scenario and say, like, instead of having the regime, the Bashar Assad dynasty led the country in the way that they did, and they were collapsed in 2013, I'm sure more likely we would have a Libyan scenario than the possibility of having it now, because he would be a symbol of resistance. He would be the one who was ousted by the imperial power, who basically ousted Gaddafi as well. The way how he treated and mistreated and actually betrayed the Syrian army and his own loyalists actually was the end career for him. I'm following loyalists like on, including like relatives from, remember, they are so pissed off. Like, if the life of Assad is is going to be under threat, it's going to be from the loyalists before the opposition, to put it this way. So what are the current challenges? And then after that, I will reflect on a report that we have been working on for many years now, and we are reaching a third stage. And then I will build on a research that I conducted during my academic life, but also before, as a based on first-hand observation of the Syrian uprising when I was in Damascus until 2012. So one of the main challenges now, you have over 90% of the population are under poverty line, completely. Salaries are like the salary are between $4 to $20 a month, whereas the cost of living is over $100, $200. So we have crippling economic sanctions, or the so-called the Syria Civilian and Protection Act of 2019. And the fact that al-Julani or Ahmed al-Shara, the current de facto leader of the it's not a government, he is appointing a government, but the current leader of the forces that enter Damascus is actually, he and his group, the Hayat Tahrir Sham HTS, are on the US specially designated global terrorist pursuant the Executive Order 13224 since 2013. And actually, they offer $10 million on their website, the State Department and Department of Justice, for any helpful information about Julani. Just to clarify, I have problem with all these designations. I have problem conceptually and ethically with the designation of terrorist Y and terrorist A and terrorist B, because in most cases, actually, it's the state worldwide is the perpetrator of violence and terrorism more than non-state actors. So that basically reserved this definition to certain groups and certain regions. The second, extremely important but undercovered, like almost like non-existent, like a few reports here and there, but significant. Israel's unprovoked aggression and lawlessness. The IDF had destroyed the Syrian army in the past in the first 48 hours, actually in the first hours of Syrians celebrating their people were on the street when Israel started to attack every single military base empty without any provocation. And the claim is they want to prevent it from falling into the wrong hand, which is, according to international law, is lawlessness. Basically, you can't simply attack the whole army of another country simply because the regime was changed. Especially if the new government or the people on the ground didn't have any provocation or any threat or anything that will give you a justification. Moreover, on the day, the Netanyahu administration declared the 1974 freezing of the conflict as null, and he declared the Golan Heights as an eternal part of Israel, and also expanded. He promised to double the population there and expand it towards Damascus. They are 25 kilometers from Damascus, occupying villages and expelling people from their homes. That's basically a violation of international law. There is no single law that will justify that. But for me, it goes even further. In political science, we emphasize the separation, we analyze government, regime, and states. But one of the key foundations of any state is the monopoly of physical use of violence, the Weberian Max Weber definitions. So what Israel did in this way, they eliminated all basically heavy artillery, all airplanes, all naval, the Syrian Navy is completely destroyed. All airplanes were destroyed, etc. So what's the point behind that? It's actually Netanyahu is thinking 5-6 years from now, you need to restructure the Syrian army. You need to have a monopoly over the use of physical violence. By destroying that, you are giving pockets like ISIS-like and also radical group who will be resisting Julani later, or Ahmed Shara, the current leader, and actually they won't be able to fight back. That's the point, to actually to keep Syria in a permanent state of civil war. That's what Netanyahu did, more than the annexation of Golan and other countries. What he did with that move is actually sowing the seed for future conflict. The other challenge, number 3, is the relevance and the implementation of the UN Security Resolution 2254, which is whether it's still relevant in the case of post-Assad Syria or not. There's still debate whether, because I can really unpack all of these, but just keep in mind, this is the UN framework for a transitional period, just to simplify it. So some argue that since the Assad as a regime and the government is not there anymore, so basically this resolution is basically void. Like it should be. We should think about something else. The fourth challenge is the undisciplined and vindictive individuals and groups under the HTS alliance, or what the so-called the Quwat al-Rida, deterrence of aggression. So the Jolani is a leader of really uneasy alliance. You have people who just want to live, and also resisted really violation. They lost family members. They want to live a life in dignity. They don't care about whether you are an Alawite or Christian or whatsoever. And you have, to his right also, you have basically radical group who basically want a monopoly of the state by Islamist group. So, and he proved to be, after 14 years, the most pragmatic and politicians and savvy politicians in the Syrian conflict. More than he outsmarted the United States, Turkey, Assad, Russia, and everyone else. And actually, he changed shape several times to an extent that is non-recognizable. The fifth challenge is the future of the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, especially with the fact that Turkey and now has the upper hand in shaping these relations. One of the key armies called the National Army, there are 5-6 groups, many groups. I'm not going to bother you with the details. But the Syrian National, the National Army is a mercenary army. Has nothing to do with national, except it's mostly, you can say it's a Turkish national army than a Syrian national army. And this is the army that expelled the Kurds from Afrin. And actually, it was ethnic cleansing. So population transfer, people who were expelled from by the Syrian regime and its allies from Damascus were resettled in their own place, and the Kurdish population basically were transferred to somewhere else. Some to Aleppo, some to northeast. So that there is really an easy tension here, and it's up to how Turkey and the SDF and the next administration, American administration, are going to navigate these challenges. The sixth challenge is actually when you have two administrations that don't believe in international law, then we are facing really unpredictability. It's unlike the liberal order. You can see violation here and there, but here someone is saying, like, and we know, like, from experience, that the Trump administration gifted Golan Heights, Eastern Jerusalem, and which is a violation of international law. That you can gift basically something like it's if you want to work for peace, then you have to work for peace, not to say like, okay, now you are de facto. You don't feel safe, then you have the right to occupy these lands. International law, just to be clear, doesn't work this way. If that's your opinion, that's your opinion. International law doesn't have this opinion. So the question is, with the are we going to face a process of blackmailing the new government and Syrians? And we started to see that, which means like would be giving up the Golan Heights be the price to be paid by the new government if they are wishing to prioritize peace and reconstruction and lifting the economic sanctions? It's yet to be seen. Without lifting the economic sanctions, the people will continue to flee from their home country. And now, for the first time in 14 years, we are seeing actually a reversal. People are actually immigrating back. People who didn't see their family for 14 years are going back, traveling back. especially like refugees who are living in the shadow of the state, exploited, especially in Turkey and Lebanon, they immediately went back. Immediately went back. They want to rebuild their country. They want to live in dignity and humiliation. So it's a public policy question. If you are, as let's say, a Western country and like European country, and interested in actually in managing your economy, addressing the refugee crisis, then you have to deal with these questions. You can't continue to impose sanctions and expect people basically not to leave, because these are your own sanctions. So these are some of the overviews of the current situation, and I can unpack every single step here. But for now, I have so many slides, but so I will skip many of them just to give you a glimpse of the first early stages for the sake of time and the questions. But I, in addition to being an academic from Syria who fled from the Syrian conflict and invested in this, so I as a professor, but also as someone who is concerned with having impactful policy. I worked with an excellent center called Syrian Center for Policy Research. This center was founded before anyone thought about question of development, identity, anything in Syria. It was based in Syria. They were expelled by the Syrian regime. They were in Lebanon. They were harassed by the Lebanese authority, and now they are based in we have a large team on the ground. But there was a cooperation with No War Project, University of Vienna, and we worked on two background paper. The first one, Identity Politics in Syria, which was a background paper, and then we had conference between different people, 3-day sessions. We produced like a preliminary research called Religious, Ethnic, and Gender Identity Politics in Syria, which basically would give you really more nuance, like details about what happened, who are the parties that were involved, how they basically manipulated identities in these contexts, including to basically consolidate their power. So amongst the things that we analyze, and there isn't any party that was exempted from that, is basically using incitement, fabrications of violence based on sectarian basis. Some stories were non-existent, nevertheless they had impact. Like it's not something unique. Look at the current age of fake news, and you will understand what we are like. It's not really, it doesn't take rocket science to imagine like we are experiencing similar thing, whether in the US or in the around the Middle East. So that led to demonization of the other and the victimhood discourse, and with that they mobilize a local and regional material and human resources. That led to submission to or being influenced by hate speech, which means adoption. But also in many cases they were resisted. In many cases they were manipulated on the ground. So basically, even from our extensive studies, you have a group, armed group, who adopted sectarian discourse, but they were completely secular, cynical in their use. But that was their only way to get basically support to protect themselves. So it's beyond the simplifying ideological and also orientalist trope. It's really more nuanced than what you might think. So with that led to growing power of sectarianization forces and the suffocation of civil society forces. So how we approach the question of identity and identification and sectarianization, we treat it as any phenomena. We analyze the impact, we identify beneficiaries and losers, we identify the actors, specific actors, and what were the processes through which they consolidated their power, and also the intra-fight between a group, even when they declare they share the same objective, and how they shaped policies and implemented policies that actually had impact on the grounds. So now let me go back to one slide before about the definitions. Just want to emphasize that we had a procedural, operational definition of identity politics, and more specifically, politicization of identity, as being a set of policies, discourses, and practices aimed at harnessing affiliations and determinants of individuals and groups' identities to mobilize group solidarities and force them into conflicts or a societal polarization by reducing complex identities to primary determinant defined as essentially different and irreconcilable with the determinants of the identity of the other. These policies interact with cultural and societal forces and are either adopted, surrendered to, or actually resisted. And for example, like less people would talk, will focus. I see that this discourse is coming back again about the rights of minority and etc. But doesn't take into nuances why, for instance, ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra or HTS had one of the bloodiest conflict in the between two groups. If they are both ISIS, Al Qaeda, etc., then why they had this bloody? Then would you say like it's politics? That's good. That's good to start. So you are adding politics, you are adding power. That's you adding economic interest. Then that it became more nuanced. The second example is basically how you identify the Kurds. Are they Sunni or are they Kurds? Which identity is more salient for you? Because if you are, I see like Kurds versus Arabs, then you mean like ethnicity over as a determinant of identity over being both as Muslim, mostly from Sunni background, with also Yazidi, with also some Alawite amongst them. But that's the question. You add layers to that and problematize the one-dimensional identity narrative. So now let me walk you back. So and you can read my article where I document the first 3 years of the unfolding and the process of sectarianization in particular. Starting with why and how has the social movement in Syria during the context of the Arab Spring came to be so dramatically transformed from peaceful protests centered around popular demands for political reforms to ongoing civil war with an increasing visibility of sectarian and exclusive discourses. And how did inline activists and sectarian entrepreneurs use social media, for instance, during that period as a strategy for group making? But this narrative is not far from how the region is generally depicted through the Orientalist eyes. If you check these from the Spectator, and also from the New Statement, like the 30 years war, like that's basically it's addressing the audience here in this case is basically Western audience. It's basically the war between Catholic and Protestant. So to simplify it for you, it's just like that. It's between Sunni and Shia. There is no way, like no other dimension. Let alone the if you compare the depiction of the two guys here to the right, and compare that to the Nazi propaganda, you will see the depiction of the nose is very similar to anti-Semite propaganda around that time, which is interesting in that attribution that there is primordial identity that doesn't change over time and it's a threatening identity. But this narrative is not new. And even the mobilization that took place in 2012, 13, 14, etc., even the rise of ISIS cannot be understood without taking the post-invasion of Iraq in 2003 as a disastrous and one of the catalysts of many disasters that take place, continue to be unfolding in the in the Arab world. That gave rise to the regional sectarian narrative. Take, for example, King Abdullah of Jordan in 2004, 1 year after the invasion. He warned against the threat of the Shiite crescent. So that's early on, before even anyone was so deep into that there is an alliance between the Shia of Iran, the Alawite, etc., which I found it very problematic and as very simplifying. Because even like if you add Hamas to that equation, then you have to think about something else. But this is not a new narrative. This is a very classic Orientalist and ahistorical reductionist accounts. It reduces identities and diversity in the Middle East and the impact of colonialism, especially British and French colonialism, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the rise of nation state, into simply primordialist, essentialist, one-dimensional identity that could be explained by simply saying there is ancient hatred. It's like a biblical word, like people fighting each other based on scripts. And even if the perpetrator of violence basically cite these texts, we have to be attentive to the fact that it's being instrumentalized to achieve their goals, because you have to also address their victims. Their victims, since you have victims who are from the similar group, then you have to think about, okay, why they are targeting their similar group. It's easy for many to say, like, oh, the Sunni are targeting Shia or Christian or Alawite, but then why these forces would target Sunni to start with? Most victims of ISIS, arguably, were mostly Sunni from local people who resisted their rule. But if we follow this narrative, the easy narrative that we see now, and I see politicians talking about the rights of the minority versus etc. And of course, my family are from minority background. Yeah, I'm secular, so I don't identify either as minority or majority. So I'm minority of the minority, if you want to put it this way. So we see a narrative now between Sunni versus Shia, minorities versus majority, Christians versus Muslims, Jews versus Arabs, etc. And we have to unpack that. Look at this map, for instance, of 2008. The Americans draw maps, hired think tanks, hired local informants, hired basically a diasporic Iraqi and now Syrian and Iranian, basically to recreate maps that impose geography and ethnicity based on that. So now we in order to analyze, let's say, what's going on in Tikrit, you don't analyze the social history of classes, parties, legacies of authoritarianism, collapse of socialism, rise of neoliberalism, the consocialism, the sectarianization and ethnicization of the parliament of school curriculum in Iraq. No, it became very simple. You check the map, you go to the legend to the right and say, oh, this is Sunni in yellow, and this is red, and this is, oh, that explains everything. Is that really very different from today? This is from 2017. One of the policy papers that was published also follows similar routes, that in order to understand the Syrian conflict in 2017, you have to recognize that it's a war between minorities versus a majority. And then again, they create Kurds, Bedouin, Shia, Ismaili, Druze, Alawite, Sunni, etc. And of course, Christian is one category, but Christian are many sects as well. Like even in Judaism, you don't have just Jew, you have Sephardim, you have Mizrahi, you have Ashkenazi, you have variations, you have social classes that overlap with that and can create actually alliance between different groups, like in the sense of, let's say, an alliance between the proletariat, more than the salience of their own identity. But now let me do a flashback. This is the French map of 1935 when France colonized Syria and Lebanon. Syria and Lebanon were part of one country at the time, and the British basically were controlling Transjordan and Palestine and Iraq as well. So in 1935, the population map is very similar to that. So now we are back to analyzing and reducing dynamic of conflicts. Like we can say, like, oh, let's forget about like 70 years of development of post-colonial state, collapse of Soviet Union, collapse of the disorder. And now let's analyze that by linking this map to the other map. So in general, when you go back now to the post-Arab Spring literature, why the Syrian uprising happened when it happened. Some use structural and institutional transformations, basically the collapse of the old order, gradually the erosion of that old order, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Just to give you a sense, Syria was a center of Cold War in the 1950s and 1960s, to the extent that in 1957, Turkey, as a member of the NATO, was about to invade Syria. Syria and Egypt became unified under Gamal Abdel Nasser with the rise of Pan-Arabism and became one country called United Arab Republic from 1958 until 1961. Many of the policies of nationalization and socialism took place during that period. In fact, the official flag of Syria with the two stars, which is changed now, it's the United Arab Republic flag. One star represent Egypt, one star represent Syria. Other argued that there was networks that the state, local networks, that the state construct across ethnic and sectarian boundaries. During the early stages, many of these middlemen either defected or basically attacked or assassinated or basically were compromised. Therefore, the regime lost control. So the regime wasn't directly ruling simply by using coercion, but using local people as the middlemen. Other explain the underlying causes by arguing that there was a role of authoritarian regimes in deliberately manipulating and instrumentalizing ethnic and sectarian identification. Whereas others also say, like, they use the evil dictators or evil politicians' explanation, saying that once the bad people are out of power, everything will take time, but everything will be resolved almost automatically because that was the main cause of the. Let's say that's the cancer that is causing the slow death of the state. Yet others overemphasize, as I show on the previous maps, the religious aspect of sectarianism, as if it's an innate and immutable aspect of culture and societies in the MENA region. So, what do we mean by sectarianism? It's broadly defined as the political mobilization of religious differences as a framework for the distribution of rights, privileges, and or violence among certain population. So personally, I use sectarian identification. I don't use identity. By that, I mean, it's coming from social constructivism. By that, I mean appeal and effect of identification to one's sect or ethnicity, which in the case of Syria means political identification around Alawiteness, around Sunniness, around Shianess. I don't assume that there is one sect or one religion that has crystallized boundaries. All people act in the same way. All people don't have just this one-dimensional identity. And that applies to all of us. If I ask all of you, which identity for you matters the most? You might be identify yourself as an Israeli, Palestinian, or Iraqi, or an American, and say American friend. And then I said, like, okay, what is really the most? Like, if it's put on the test, it could be you could be a Republican, you could be a conservative, you could be a secular, you could be basically atheist, like, and you could be basically a poor person, you could be upper class, like so. Variations will shape the way in which your answer could be framed, and you see your affiliation with other groups. For instance, going to Harvard and the Ivy League give you an identity that's different from going to a community college, and that's part of the socialization. Althusser talk about that as part of the apparatus, ideology apparatus that reproduce new classes, for instance. So by sect, I don't mean, again, crystallized group that is homogeneous, but as a residual sociality, I build on Williams and Lisa Wadeen, that was implicitly lived, gradually gets activated and become politically fraught. I'm not going to bother you with theory, but just want to distinguish by what I mean by that. We have a tendency, all of us, even in our daily life, in our communication, to treat religion, sects, or ethnic group in a groupist terms. This is coming from Brubaker from sociology, which means the tendency to analyze the present or perceive identity categories as substantial and real entities. However, he proposes to use groupness instead, like building on Benedict Anderson, Imagined Communities, and others, where nation is a process. It's nationness. Nationalism require a complicated process to be reproduced. So this approach de-essentializes identity categories by treating groupness as an event. It could succeed, but it could fail. And also, this may not happen when a groupness fails to crystallize. Why this matter? Because let's say you are all politicians now. I'm telling you, this is the roadmap. You have the full authority. the society in country X are willing to implement whatever you suggest, and this is very simplistic, basically experimental thought. So I'm telling you, okay, we're ready. Whatever you suggest, let's follow suits. Pierre Bourdieu calls that as a performative character of classificatory schemes and practical representation. What does that mean? If you see the people as groups, then any suggestions that or policy or parliament or school curriculum or census would be based on this projection of your own view, that the solution would be either partitioning Syria or Iraq or any country and give representative of the warring party seats in the parliament and have the constitution respect every single identified collective group. This is problematic because it may contribute to producing what they apparently describe or designate. It can bring into existence the thing they name. That was the case of Iraq. For instance, the Iraqi families who fled from after the invasion of Iraq, when I was in Damascus, they only saw themselves as Iraqi. They didn't see themselves as Sunni or Shia. Their sons and kids, when like 20 years later, they identify as Kurds or as Shia or as Sunni, as fundamentally different identity within the same household. This is how radical the change could happen when we project the way how we see the world into policies. So quickly, this is the Arab Spring that basically was off the radar of many people over the past few years due to the freezing of the conflict. But it started with the uprising against the President Zain al-Abidin Ben Ali in Tunisia. He fled. Gaddafi was killed after the NATO intervention, which you should pay attention to because the Russian and the Chinese were betrayed from their perspective. They abstained from the vote of 1970 Security Resolution 1973, and the promise was not to change the regime. The NATO and the Arab League went ahead, and the Americans, and actually changed the regime. And they vowed that they won't allow any resolution to pass regarding Syria, and they actually continue to do so. So without taking this into consideration, it would be really hard for most people to understand why the Russians have these interested in, and actually in couldn't they do better? This is even before the war on Ukraine. Russia intervened in Syria in 2015 officially. Mubarak was ousted also early on in January. There was also another revolution against the King of Bahrain and also in Saudi Arabia. The uprising in Saudi Arabia lasted for 2 years, but there is an excellent documentary by a documentarian, excellent Safa Ahmed. I highly recommend her work. It's called the Saudi Arab Spring, because for 2 years, how to kill a revolution actually without by using your influence and your how the media, Western media, can actually kill in silence and be complicit in suppressing an uprising. Ali Abdullah Saleh was killed later when he attempted to go back. So the whole Middle East is actually in different shape. And let's not forget that after October 7 and the ongoing genocidal campaign against population in Gaza and what's going also on in Western Bank and stuff will shape the Middle East for unforeseeable future. So I will conclude just with 2 slides. I have a lot just to how it started, how what was the spark that kindled the Syrian uprising. You see these graffiti on the school, and this is the first protest in Dar'a in March 18. The first organized protest was in Souq al-Hamidi in March 15, 2011, but was mostly from college-educated liberals and also leftist individuals, not parties. But there was a turning point when that took place in Dar'a. which is 13 kilometers north of the border of Jordan, 90 kilometers or 56 miles from south of Damascus. The security forces basically they arrested school children for spraying graffiti, mimicking the slogans of the Arab Spring and calling for the toppling of the regime. They were arrested, allegedly tortured. The family demanded their family to be released. There were rumors. I'm not going to delve deeper into that, but these rumors also contributed to people getting angry and also getting into the street. And they were shot at. So I remember 3 or 4 people were killed around that time, and they were the first martyr of the revolution. And that was the Friday of Dignity. This is why the slogan of dignity is very significant from that time onward. The thing that I will not forget, and I have to emphasize that, like, people didn't immediately actually ask for the toppling the regime. Let me skip here, just show you this complicated. Here we go. So between February and March 2011, the people actually were demanding reforming the regime. These were the only slogans, reforming the regime, because the narrative that Bashar al-Assad came with in 2000, that he is different from his father, that he is the modernizer, that he is going to open the space. There was Rabi' Damascus Spring. 6 months later, every single one almost was detained and arrested for many years. And they started to close cultural clubs. Everyone who dared actually to criticize the older regime were basically ended up in the prison. The only thing that Assad did that changed the control of the country in a significant way was basically neoliberal policy. So he changed Syria was like a semi-socialist country, which is state-led capitalism, more like the Soviet style, very centralized. But the Assad regime gave his family and his cousin a monopoly, and while actually opened the spaces for investment. That created and that was the experiment that started actually in Chile in 1973 with the support of the American under Pinochet. So you could be a dictator at an authoritarian regime, but a successful capitalist neoliberal economy. So what does that mean? So the historical support of the socialist party in Syria under Hafez al-Assad, especially in Dar'a, in Deir ez-Zor, Dar'a southern Syria, Deir ez-Zor northeast, Raqqa, has been eroded. The de facto social contract has been dismantled by the Syrian regime itself. So when people were demanding, and we'll conclude with that, I was in Damascus when he gave his first speech in the parliament in March 30, 2011. I was with a friend in Bab Touma in Damascus, the historical neighborhood in Damascus. And I thought to myself, I was a young man, like 28 years old, like, that's the moment. That's the moment where Bashar al-Assad actually will get rid of all these old gods. I wanted to convince myself he is different from others. Instead, he spent the whole 2 hours cracking jokes, calling everyone as they are legitimate concern, but the infiltrators, the Mundassin, the germs, the imperialists, the Mossad, so everything became, yeah, there are few people with legitimate concerns, but the majority basically has been manipulated. Since that was the turning point in the history of the narrative and of the conflict, and also the mismanagement and the missed opportunities that Bashar al-Assad and his regime actually has lost. To walk you through, April to May 2011, we started to see revolutionary slogans calling for toppling the regime, which I call boundary blurring. They emphasize inclusiveness, universalism, liberal democratic values, and national unity, while reducing the importance of banal sectarian and ethnic identification as the principles of discursive categorization and social organization. But in June, 2011, we started to see the early seeds of militarization across the border between Turkey and Syria. And we started to see boundary making. New categorization has emerged around that time and without replacing the strategy of boundary blurring. But we started to see back then revolutionary and religious outbidding, which is coming back again right now in Syria, which means like whether you are supporting the Free Syrian Army or not became the dominant narrative by September 2011. So if you are against Assad, but against the militarization of the uprising, then you are implicitly supporting the Syrian regime. So it became really ultimately many layers of fragmentation early on. By January, February 2000 until August 2012, we started to see supra-local actors support for selected militant groups. That's specifically after 2012, including the rise of Islamist and jihadist armed group with overtly sectarian rhetoric that became more visible. And boundary making increasingly supplanted boundary blurring and further fragmented the incoherent opposition. And finally, by January, June 2013, we reached another level that laid the foundation for the coming of ISIS, which is the transnationalization of militant sectarian identification, during which the Syrian conflict framed as part of a larger regional sectarian bipolarization fueled by Iranian and Saudi meddling. And the sect-coded slogans increasingly reflected the confluence of bottom-up, local and grassroots level, and top-down, supra-local and elite level dynamics. Just to clarify, this is the last thing. What I mean by supra-local actors to avoid using jargonian language. Local actors are basically people on the ground. Supra-local are a heterogeneous constellation of groups and individuals that consists of sectarian entrepreneurs, mainly in the Gulf-based private networks and charities of religiously conservative funders, clerics, sympathizers with the Muslim Brotherhood around that time, and regional actors. They invested in the conflict master cleavage, which means like it's a sectarian ethnic conflict and local grievances. So they tapped into local grievances and shaped them with the narrative that it's not about being suppressed or being impoverished by neoliberal policies. It's more about your identity as a religious identity or ethnic identity rather than as economic identity or basically political identity. Arab satellite outlets plays a fundamental role in non-verifying stories, circulating rumors, and also some Salafist satellite stations like Safa and Wisal before they became controlled by the Saudi, again, under Mohammed bin Salman recently. Social media, mainly Facebook in the case of Syria. Syria didn't invest in Twitter. Only activists from upper classes speaking English, they are the ones who use Twitter, but YouTube became channels to upload basically videos. That contributed to a larger extent to the sectarianization of the narrative and laid the necessary conditions for constructing exclusionary symbols and rhetoric about the Syrian conflict and its causes. So I will conclude with that and will welcome any questions you might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Basilius. I think for the short amount of time you had, you gave us so much context and historical context to ground us in understanding, what's going to take place in Syria, what's currently taking place. So I know you're running out of time, so I'll try to be quick with the questions. So I'll ask one general question. I'll try to simplify what Genevra asked, which is, given the context that you've given us, especially with also the colonial interventions that date back all the way to like 1920s, 1930s, even before, was civil war in Syria avoidable, or was there a way to actually not have the civil war? I know this is a what if question, but this is something we can think about.
Yeah, so I will be quick with that. So that's what we call on political science counterfactual argument. So which means like you outline the missed opportunities, for instance, and say like if actor A, knowing the power and the opportunities, actual opportunities that were in place, and follow this path but not that path, would that minimize casualties? And like I would argue yes. So look, the path that the Assad regime and also the enemies of Assad regime has followed, made sure the recipe for a sustained conflict will prevail for unforeseeable future. Remember when I started my say, like people might ask, like, oh, why Netanyahu is attacking the Syrian army? Literally, people were in the street celebrating. He targeted Cover Suzy with airjet. So what's the rationale behind destroying the archive? The branch where they dispute the passport, Syrian passport, was destroyed. So what's the point? What's the military objective? What's the strategy behind that? So my argument, knowing from political science, there is no state without a military. So, so in order to ensure that Syria for unforeseeable future will be a quagmire and no single actor, even if they are your friends, you don't want them as your friends. You want to keep expanding, and that's actually consistent with the Ben Gvir and the Smotrich and his really radical branch. And so I see like how he thinks in a way that, so if you ask me like 5 years from now, what could have been prevented and ensure like Syria is a stable country, I would say like don't bomb the Syrian army. That's a very key actor to make sure the country is stable and not affecting anyone in the forces. You want Syria a peaceful country, demilitarized, etc. Don't destroy its army. What you create is basically fertile ground for militia to proliferate in the future.
Thank you for the answer. So before I get to Deborah, I know you have your hand raised. I wanted to ask a question from Carol, which is a questions on the geopolitics and diplomacy. So she says, I remember that Assad was frozen out of the Arab League and unexpectedly let back in last year. They've been engaging with him for over a year now, and now he's no longer there. Do we have any indications why he was let back into the Arab League and what the end results this had?
Yeah, that's relevant to. So I'm glad I started with the background because it's now I can refer back to that conceptual map. You remember I referred to something called the Sitana Accord and the 2245 security resolution. That because basically it's a framework under the the framework of the United Nations. Basically, all parties have to engage in a meaningful transitional period, including like 3 months and then 18 months changing the constitution, etc. So now the question is whether the and that just the date of that was December 2015. So the negotiation should have been started 2016 in the January. So they did start with that, but the Syrian regime wasn't serious at all and actually in even ensuring that there is transition of power. Let's not forget that he managed a referendum and new election again, and he re-elected himself once again. So basically, he said like, okay, we have now a new candidate. New candidate actually emerged. Like they got a few hundred people, but more cosmetic. It's not meaningful. And like if you are really responsible, then you step down. But that's not the question. I'm not sure if you are following. And here I want to pay homage to all the Syrian victims in the slaughterhouses of the prisons, from Saidnaya to Ania. We have friends. Every family, while people are celebrating, we have over 150,000 Syrian disappeared from record. We don't know where their whereabouts. So while people are on the streets celebrating, thinking about which country would become in a few months, or minority rights, women rights, etc., there are people in round Sednaya prison digging up within the document because there wasn't any documentation. There wasn't any responsible protection of the documentation there. People were left by themselves, for themselves, trying to find their beloved one. So now knowing what's going on, and there was a report by Amnesty, there was a Rabitat Mu'taqali Sednaya, there's a Syrian group that did fantastic work, and also forensic architecture also did a reconstruction of the slaughterhouse of Sednaya. I highly recommend following all these works. But knowing now the hell on earth that was there, now we know why Assad wouldn't leave power at all. When you have all these corpses in your backyard, the last thing you will do, say, I'm leaving and actually you can do an investigation. He won't. So he didn't do any scenario that will allow his. So now back to normalization. After freezing the conflict, there was a profitable trade, mostly led by his brother. Now we see in the palaces of his brother, it's called the Kiptagon drug trade, billions of dollars. So basically, the states around Syria want to control that illicit trade by actually having a normalization with relation with Syria. One aspect. A second aspect is investment. It's a third aspect, control of refugees movement. So there are many layers. So he was manipulating and playing over these balances to ensure that he'll continue to be in power. And the last thing I want to say, 3 weeks ago and last month, Erdogan called him actually to reopen a new page and arrogantly said no, like all Turkish troops and backed armed group backed by Turkey should leave the country. Sovereignty first, like, so even if you are playing poker, you don't have money to bluff or have an argument. So all that accelerated. This is not a person who was serious to ensure really thinking ahead 2 years from now. Thank you everyone for the comment. That I see that, yeah.
Yeah, and I know we're over an hour, so I don't know. I want to respect your time, so
I will take Deborah. Like had Ilson. I see her hand like for a long time.
Yeah. I think Deborah, you had your hand up. Do you want to ask one quick question? You're muted, so Deborah?
The modern state, we were taught, is a modern invention of what you call the Enlightenment. But before that, in the West, there was a lot of what you call mini-states or kingdoms, even in the UK. And it came out of the Enlightenment, and I don't think it benefited humanity. I think the nationalism is causing a lot of problems, and we're facing a crisis on this planet. And I think people in England are now kind of more, what I'm saying is, small is beautiful, is they're going back. When I lived in Africa, it was very different. It wasn't so much nationalistic there. It was more like village culture. And you go back in time in my culture, in my country, before the Industrial Revolution, people lived very closely together. And culture and language spread. And I've seen similarities between Turkish embroidery and Ukrainian. So there was a bit more fluid across nations, across boundaries. And then when we got to the Enlightenment, people started drawing lines. I want to be a nation. I want this. I found that I don't really fit in because I'm autistic. And I've also found out that if you're a refugee, if you're a Roma, if you're a New Age traveller, the state doesn't like you. And if you're autistic, they certainly don't like you. Because you create a problem where they're going to fit you in. And you get this internal problem when they have this broad stream, and it's from the macro to the cosmos, to the micro. So in old-fashioned societies, everybody had a place. There was no problem. It wasn't like the market economy. Even the person who wasn't very bright had a place in the village. Everybody was valued. And it's the same in Africa, where I was, in rural areas. Everybody had a value. But then we got to the urbanization, and now, if you don't earn a living, if you've got a mentality which is different, if you're a Roma, if you're New Age, you're surplus to requirement. And that, to me, is a great loss. And I think to myself, well, I'm not too keen on the nation state because I can see it go around very circular. What goes around comes around. And until we start thinking differently about how we get together as people, not just little groups here and little groups there, and then we're never going to get on.
Yeah, so I would share just one thing for the sake of time, and if someone else also has a question. Yeah, definitely, like redrawing borders, like it's indisputable fact that nationalism, while it was a candle that animated the spirit of many colonized people, actually in the current age and even before, like the imposition of nation state system that create inside outside exclusion inclusion was one of the cataclysms or the most crimes and atrocities in human history. World War I, World War II were nationalist and capitalist wars par excellence. So they became about Germanness, about Frenchness, and who is outsider and who's insider, and they start to target groups like until today. Same about the history of the Middle East. The Middle East was like, of course, it's not a heaven, but historically, like it was a place where it has a history of movement of people from one place to another place. It never been this like for instance, my personal family, like it's a Syrian family 100 years ago. Before that, they were from Cyprus, from Lebanon, from Turkey, from all around the world. This is the Mediterranean movement. So the imposition of the now this is an identity. Now, like, and same goes like with the history of our Jewish community in the Middle East. It's one of the biggest loss that took place with the rise of nationalism. I would recommend, for instance, reading Avi Shlaim, who is an Israeli historian from Iraqi background, and let him tell you about his childhood, like where Jews only saw themselves as Iraqi Jews. So the ascription of identity that was contingent on the rise of nationalism, both pan-Arabism and also Zionism at the same time. And so I concur with you, like that. I see personally nationalism, while within certain contexts, was a mobilizer to against colonialism, but after that it became really an oppressive power and a source of tragedy in our world.
Thank you, Dr. Basilius. For the sake of time, I'll ask one more question. I think might be relevant for the rest of the group in general is if you have any recommendations of written resources, either on a popular level, academic level, that would benefit the audience to learn more about what you have given us such, a good presentation of.
Yeah, well, there are. So over the past 13 years, there were several works, excellent works. So there are old works and new works. The old works focus mostly on political economy and authoritarianism. And that's basically what's the ideology of Ba'ath Party. Let's not forget that the Ba'ath Party ruled for 54 years in Syria and also in Iraq. It was the same party, but they became divided between right wing and left wing, and of course everyone calls the other one is the right wing. So that's part of the dynamic. So it ruled really two of the most important amongst the most important countries in the Middle East, Iraq and Syria. So therefore, we have great writings. So one of them would be Hanna Batatu. Hanna Batatu has a great book about the Syrian peasantry and the origin of the basically Alawite officers, but he used Marxist analysis, which is great. But he has also a massive book, a unique book about Iraq, the social classes in Iraq. I highly, highly recommend. Even I love that book even more than the book about Syria. You have writings by Lisa Wadeen. You have writings she has two books about Syria. You have writing by Wendy Perelman. She wrote extensively, especially recently, academic and non-academic books about Syrian refugees and situating their stories within the uprising and aftermath. You have my writing, but I would like modestly, I would recommend like my fellow first. If you're interested in public policy, then I would recommend if you check the recording, check the recent report by the Syrian Center for Policy Research, the one that I shared this one. because the one to the left is the background paper, the one to the right is the based on really on the ground survey and interviews and great team, great deliberation. It's not one person, it's collective effort. Think about, and we are going to conduct the third stage to build on what we have achieved in this report. So this is more for the public audience. It's less jargonian, it's more practical, and also examine which parties involved in which method in actually instrumentalizing identity in that context. I would recommend Jadaliya, finally. Jadaliya has a page. I'm one of the co-editor of Jadaliya, also on the Syria page. Bassam Haddad, also, he has a great book about political economy in Syria, especially the transformation of economy under Bashar al-Assad and the rise of a new elite under new liberalism. It's fundamental to understand the new network that was very different from Hafez al-Assad's rules. So everyone really, it depends on what's your interests are. There is another website, it's that I follow, Al Jamhuriya. Al Jamhuriya means republic. It's also an excellent source. Ainab Baladi, like there are plenty of sources. I'm happy to follow up with you, Sabil, and also send any links that you might be interested in. But again, there are 3 tiers of publications: academic, which include books and peer-reviewed articles. There is the public policy reports, which can come from think tanks to actually UN reports to actually local groups. And the third tier is the daily news and daily media from Jadaliya, Jamhuriya, Ainab Baladi, and Salon Surya, and many others.
Thank you so much for that. And yeah, I can email you after and I'll send those resources to the audience. Since we're a little over time, I just want to thank you. And if you have any last things to say in terms of, how the audience can support your work or anything else, feel free to tell us.
Yeah, so the next few years will be difficult for us. It's like I call the Syria state under. I don't have illusions. I don't have illusions that Assad is gone, then everything is rosy and unicorns. But the challenges is the impact and the significance of intervention in Syria makes citizens of countries that intervene in Syria complicit in our bloodshed. To put it bluntly, from the US that crippled our economy, from the way, actually, don't go far. I studied in the US for 10 years. After the economic sanctions imposed, Bank of America closed my own account. And I was like, they started to request like permanent residency, 6 months. They made my life and my family's life as hell as possible. Every Syrian became a potential terrorist. And even now, Assad is gone, they are going to basically compromise and blackmail us over everything after everything happened. So my audience, I can see from the name, your governments have been directly, it's easy to say Russia and Iran. It's easy. You feel good about yourself, right? But actually, equally, the United States, Israel, Turkey, Britain, France, Italy, like every single country was complicit in the bloodshed that has been spilled in Syria. So if we really care about being and becoming universal citizens who would, if a child cry in the, in Warsaw, I will feel the ache in my heart. That's the level that we should reach. If a child lost his parents in Gaza, that means you lost your parents, you lost your child. When we reach this point where we embrace the Nakba and the Holocaust at the same time, then I would say that's the future that we should work for. And for Syria, please don't support any more intervention in this country, whether it's under sanctions or military. We need to rebuild the country. My children might see it. I'm sure I'm not going to see it in the way that I hope so. And thank you so much for being here and for listening. And I hope I was as clear as possible.
Thank you. We had so many questions. I think we weren't able to get through
Thank
much of them, but I think, you did such a good job, and we just want to thank you for your time, and the effort that you put into explain everything to us. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it and appreciate your concern about Syrians and future. Thank you. Take care. Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Right. So, as Dr. Basilius leaves, I think we don't have enough time for action today, so I'll just send the link. I updated the website with some new actions, so you can go through this, and I'll stay for a few more minutes in case anyone has questions. But thank you everyone for coming today, and next week we'll be off. And then we'll notify you. We'll make sure to send a reminder so you don't attend the link for next week. But we'll start again sometime in the new year. So we'll also send a notification on that. So thank you, everyone.